This is the last of the current series of Beyond Cyber for this year. Long may it continue. For those of you who've been, a couple of you been to previous ones, you know what this is all about and who I am. But for those of you who don't, my name's Dan Prince. I'm a professor of cybersecurity at Lancaster University, and it's a great delight to welcome you all here for the last Beyond Cyber event. The whole idea of Beyond Cyber is to really bring in people to get you to think differently about what cybersecurity is, what it's about, how it works, and the impact that it has. And then hopefully, by thinking about it in a different way, you can take that forward into your organizations and make some really meaningful changes to the UK. The type of work that we do at Lancaster University is lots of interdisciplinary type work, thinking about not just cybersecurity, but security in general. And this is part of a series of kind of outreach and engagement events that we're doing to bring people together and build networks so that we can see meaningful and real change around cybersecurity and security in the UK. But it's an absolute delight to introduce our last speaker of the series, Robin Ince. So Robin is best known as a comedian and popularizer of scientific ideas. He is the creator and co-host of the popular podcast Robin and Josie's Book of Shambles, which garners over 100,000 hits a month, and the celebrated co-presenter of the Sony Gold Award-winning BBC Radio 4 series The Infinite Monkey Cage with some lesser-known musician Brian Cox. Renowned for his wit and ability to make science both accessible and entertaining, Robin has captivated audiences worldwide with solo shows exploring topics like consciousness, Charles Darwin, and physics. Today, Robin brings his unique blend of humour and scientific insight to address one of the most pressing issues of our time, AI. Prepare to be enlightened, entertained, and perhaps even surprised by as Robin shares his perspective on the challenges we face in the rapidly evolving digital age. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome to the stage. Thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you very much. I've turned it on. It's on. Thank you very much. This is really interesting for me because I say, by the way, that's not AI, that image of me. That's just 15 years old. So if you think that that's, I realise that's if you think he's not been very well. No, it was a long time ago. But I say yes to doing lots of events where I think I don't really know about this, so I'm going to find out. And this was one of those kind of examples. So I'm quite an analog person. In fact, Brian Cox made me buy an Apple Watch when we were last in Manchester. He went, "You're too analog. I need you to get more modern, right?" So I got an Apple Watch, but I didn't get on with it because what I found, apart from the fact that obviously I did like that, that little kit, we go, "Oh, the circle's closed. Haven't I stood up for ages?" And it's done really good on the standing. But what happens is, because I couldn't work out how to stop it listening to me, because I don't really pause for breath when I do shows or talks, about 40 minutes in, if I did suddenly have a glass of water, the watch would just go, "I'm sorry, I don't understand the question." And so it had basically produced the 40 minutes of tangential comments. So I was thinking about where do I do it, because I could pretend I could have read a couple of books and gone, "Oh, I can talk about cybersecurity from the perspective of, a world which is not the one that's in my mind, which isn't really the one that interests and fascinates me." And I think the thing that fascinates me most about where we're going with technology is not so much that will the machine start passing the Turing test, but will we start failing the Turing test? Will we find that the way that we have reduced the dimensions of what it is to be human through the kind of the social media, where we still have so many people who view everything as binary? And we see that all the time in politics, we see that in journalism, we see that online, we see that in so many different places where if we start to lose, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's in terms of gender diversity, race diversity, all of those things that show that we are a spectrum. We're a spectrum. We are not A or B, yes or no. And so the thing that I suppose I was thinking about, I'll go through the first slide there. But first of all, I thought I'd show you this. That's my brain. That really is my brain, by the way. That is a brain scan that I had, it would be about 6 years ago. And I had a brain scan for fun because I met someone late night on a train and they said, "Hello, I've heard your radio show. Do you fancy a brain scan?" That's the kind of thing that I get. Sometimes it's like, "Do you want to come and do a cyber event in Manchester?" Sometimes it's, "Do you want to see your own brain?" And I looked at that and it's one of the most exciting things that's ever happened to me, because to be able to look at this, which is where my world is, to be able to view all of, and it's, of course, it's a big lumpen vision ultimately. Yeah, we don't see the you-ness of you or the me-ness of me in a brain scan, but we do still see where somewhere within there is the me-ness of me, and somewhere within your brain scans is the you-ness of you, but we haven't reached that level of technology yet. And in that, this is what worries me. I genuinely worries me most about the world of technology is, do we start to lose those things as we see increasing use of AI for art, for instance, or ChatGPT for poetry? And I mean, it amazes me. I've never used ChatGPT actually until yesterday. Yesterday was because I have no real interest in it. Someone said to me it's very good at doing translation. But in terms of that bit, to me, it's just a novelty nonsense. The fact that it's taken in all of these different things that get fed into it, and it gets increasingly good at then creating something which appears at times to have a human touch, which can even seem like, in the BBC, they actually put in two people talking about a radio show that are broadcast. And if you read it, I think you would probably believe that was two people talking about a radio broadcast, because Radio 4 listeners are quite predictable at times. But that kind of fascination. So this is what I was thinking, the campaign to preserve the human imagination. This is, and not merely that, the campaign to save ourselves. Now, I'll just talk about this. This is an idea. I was on the train. I always change the talks when I'm on the train because I think of something else, but I can't change the slide. So before we get to the human imagination, this saving of who we are. Because one of the things, Alan Moore, some of you might be aware of Alan Moore, wrote V for Vendetta, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Watchmen, an incredible writer. And I remember when Alan told me what spells were, because he writes about magic quite a lot. And he says spells are literally spelling. It is, so a spell may well be going on social media, creating a rumor about someone and ruining their reputation. And this is something that we see now with the way that our technology, we've basically found out with the cognitive dissonance of being a human and with the amount of information we have, that a lot of people are able to justify sometimes quite kind of bigoted positions, sometimes kind of positions of understanding, which really don't have a background. We've never had such a huge library that is accessible to us. And yet that also means we've never had so much misinformation or disinformation which can justify your position. So for instance, I'll give you an example of how I have seen some of myself, a spell that was put on me. So I have every now and again talked a little bit, quite gently, about trans inclusivity, about trans rights, because I think there's been a lot of kind of dehumanizing within that area. And the next thing I knew, someone rang me up. In fact, they texted me. They said, "Sorry to see what's happening to you." And I was like, "What's happening to me?" And then I found out that I was trending on Twitter, and I presumed that was in the Hemel Hempstead area, but I found out it was actually international trending, because someone had picked up on a very minor, I think I just said something in support of something, that a speech that Emma Watson had done. But by the end of that week, I had people writing to the author Anne Cleeves, who writes the Vera novels, saying, "Don't you know Robin Ince hates women?" So that speed in which a debate, can you just go, "Oh, that's who I am now." To some people, I'm this foul misogynist. And in the same way, we can see this in so many different political worlds. You will often see the number of celebrities who are very, very careful about any opinion they give, because they fear a PR backlash. So we are losing ourselves in those moments. We are this spell that is being cast upon us. That is an end of a very, very kind of a personal sense of security. Your security of self, your security of who you are. And it is shocking. I mean, of course, in the old days, it was just done by newspapers. So daily newspapers, and it really was still chip paper then. And they got, now everything remains So if you want to look something up, you will find something from 15 years ago, from 10 years ago. You'll find so many different kind of little snide comments or whatever it might be. And you might have experienced this yourself. If any of you have read John Ronson's You've Been Publicly Shamed, he looks at that as well. These kind of issues, which is once you have control, not merely on your own personal narrative, but on the narrative of your enemies. You know, Trump did this, I think, pretty well in the last election. I say that with a certain amount of bile moving towards vomit when I mention that. But that ability to control the narrative, to emotionally control us, is something where we lose the security of what the world can be. Now, so that's just the first point that I wanted to mention. Now, the next one, I'm going to move on to art, because I think it's a very interesting thing. When I've looked occasionally at some of the art and some of the writing that's been done by AI programs, and we're always going to have a problem with this, because the main problem I think we will have will nearly always be a problem that comes from capitalism. So I share an office with a bunch of artists and illustrators, and they've already seen a downturn in the amount of work they get because someone's come up with a program that can do their work. And this worries me a great deal in terms of art, because art is one of the things that defines us as a species. Imagination is something that defines us as a species. There are other animals we may well believe have a certain level of imagination, you know, things like crows and rooks and ravens and chimpanzees. We can see some level of imagination, but our imagination is something that makes us what we are. And what does something mean if there's, like, this is a Turner painting. So this is in the Walker Gallery in Liverpool. Some of you might have seen it. And the Walker Gallery, and that painting, you can barely tell. It's something so beautiful. It's basically him looking at dusk. And as you can see, it's nearly all light. That's nearly all that it is. It's just light and a vague sense of the ground there and a vague sense of the sky there. Now, I would imagine it's probably quite easy to put down a few instructions into a computer and make something like that. But what does it mean? Because this means something. To Turner, this was his conscious experience of interpreting the light. He knew that's not what everyone saw, but it's what he saw. Now, if it is actually then something that becomes like this, is one of the things I used to talk about. One of the beauties of this painting to me is if we look at it from a scientific perspective, you know, and we look at the story, why does that painting exist? We can go to science. We can go back, if we go to the sun and we say, why does this painting exist? Because hydrogen is becoming helium, and as hydrogen becomes helium in the sun, that creates light, and that light spreads out, and some of that light spreads out towards the planet Earth, and some of that then strikes the planet Earth, and then some of it bounces back. And some of that light and some of those photons bounced into the eyes of J.M.W. Turner, and thus he created that. So we can explain a lot of the levels of that painting from science. But the one thing we can't explain is the human imagination. So if this just becomes an illustration that comes from a machine that has no awareness of why it has created this, and has no awareness of itself, it means nothing as far as I can see. It means that everything becomes content provider. And this, I think, is one of the dangers we sometimes see. That, by the way, is some AI painting. You might have seen that. That's that particular, I forgot the name of that AI robot there, which does have sensory devices there, and made 4 different images of Alan Turing. But it doesn't know why it made those. I mean, I quite like those images. I think they're quite interesting. But the interest in them comes from us as human beings interpreting them. It doesn't come from them finding out the story that lies behind it. So that is, I've forgotten her name now. It is something, it's a mixture of data and AI. But there's no consciousness there. There's no, that's Andy Warhol there. I've deliberately chosen that painting. That's by a wonderful painter called Alice Neal. And she was very provocative, not deliberately so. It's just that the things that she painted, people found provocative. And that's kind of in itself quite an interesting thing. She had deliberate intention. She obviously often would paint people who were considered to be the low lives, considered to be the outsiders in society. And then this incredible painting where you can see Andy Warhol actually with the scars on his body from when he was shot, and, you know, very rarely saw anything like that. And Andy Warhol, one of my favorite comments of his is, he said, I don't really like watching professional entertainers because I know they know what they're doing. And I think that is, again, part of what makes art interesting to me. And by art, I mean everything. They're all forms of different human creativity. It makes it, when you're in a room and you're watching someone and you know it's happening now, and you know it's not just a series of words that they've said over and over again. They are communicating with you. But sometimes you go and see a performer. I don't know if you've ever had that thing where you've gone to see a comedian and you had a great time and he did a really funny bit when he had a go at someone in the front of the audience. And then you saw them 2 months later and he did exactly the same routine and he had a go in exactly the same way at a person in the front row who looked totally different, didn't look anything like that person. And then you realize, well, this is not an experience this is product. But yeah, that thing where I'll skip from this. This to me is a great example of what I think AI can't do. This is Patti Smith. I'm a huge fan of Patti Smith. Is anyone a fan of Patti Smith? I hope if you're not, you should be. Patti Smith, this is her going to receive Bob Dylan's Nobel Prize for Literature. And she sings Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. I'm just going to show you a tiny bit of this, hopefully.
Darling young one, saw a newborn babe with wild wolves all around it. Saw the highway of diamonds with nobody on it. I saw the black branch with blood that kept dripping. I saw the babe that was just bleeding. I saw the babe that... I'm sorry. Earth. Sultan. Sorry. I'm sorry. Could we start that section? I apologize. Sorry, I'm so nervous.
I love that. I think there is incredible beauty there. She doesn't sing the song perfectly. She finds there's that error. And that moment where she breaks, I can actually feel that, that bit where you still have the tingle of that thing. That moment is something which maybe could be programmed into something. But if it is, it again doesn't mean anything, does it? It means something when we see a performer who is able to break the wall. And she's very embarrassed about that moment, but I think that made that much. So I went to see Chris Christopherson once, and he did the same song twice because he obviously looked down, forgotten he just played it, and played it again. And I remember hearing some people going, "Oh God, that wasn't very good." I went, "No, it was amazing. It was brilliant. What a wonderful thing to see." Because one, he's Chris Christopherson. He's done enough now for us to go, "Oh bloody hell, really annoyed about Chris Christopherson doing two of this." All right, if you are, you shouldn't be there in the first place. And I think what you also see in that moment, I'm going to skip past the fall, by the way. I was going to play it. I don't know if anyone's a Fall fan, but because we're in Manchester, I thought I'd put the Fall in, but I'll skip past that one. And now this is, does anyone know who this is? Milli Vanilli. Now, this is another thing about the importance of whether something is created without knowledge or whether something has a story behind it. Now, and this is quite a sad story, right? These were two, if you don't know about this, two models, German models, and they became a huge sensation. You're a Milli Vanilli fan. What was their big hit? No, I can't remember either. So they were a huge sensation, but then it turned out that they were just miming. It was some less good-looking people who sang the songs. And that was the end of their career. So their career ends. But why? You could still look at them and it's only miming. Isn't that okay? No. The moment it became detached from that humanity, from that idea, then that's the end of their art. However we now look at it. This is some of you might know about this. This is a man called J.T. Leroy, right? There we go. J.T. Leroy. Does anyone know the story of J.T. Leroy, just out of interest? Right, I'll tell you. So J.T. Leroy, a teenager, right? Quirky teenager, quite eccentric teenager, had this kind of look almost of a young Truman Capote. And J.T. Leroy had been brought up in kind of petrol stations and stuff, and motorway service stations, freeway service stations, whatever they're called in the US. And his mother was a sex worker. And then he wrote these novels. And everyone loved them. It was the kind of thing that all the hippest people and the Rolling Stone magazine would have on the cover and spin. Oh my God, this is the coolest person ever. And then they found out that the author, well, It was actually a woman in her late 30s who got pissed off with never being published, so created a character. That's actually, I think her cousin, as far as I remember, who was in his late teens, said, wear this wig, put on these dark glasses, every now and again mention some of your story, which we've made up. But the moment that and there were movies made of J.T. Leroy's work, which you can't really see anymore now. The moment that people found out that J.T. Leroy wasn't a teenager who had been living in these kind of, these service stations with a sex worker mother, the stories meant nothing. But why? Why did they start meaning nothing? Because they're the same story. They're the same narrative. The writing is as good. And yet, by detaching it from that humanity, it's a bit like with ghostwriters. I find it very, I'm not going to, I don't know what that, I can't remember I put that there. But ghostwriters, again, when you, for some reason now, the publishing industry has a large, you might have seen the Society of Authors wants now to have it named, more people actually named, if a celebrity has kind of sat in a room for a bit and come up with a story, and then someone's gone and actually written the story, they think that person should be given some credit as well. But will that affect it? Do we have this cognitive dissonance when we go into that world that demands that we believe in this person being the creator with that narrative? This was just because I was going to mention something about not wanting to be born. I was just going to show you some of the cyborgs of my childhood, because that was originally what the talk was going to be about, but then I changed my mind. This is just an issue for anyone who's going to work on creating any voices for AI. Anyone who's the same generation as me will know this. So that's K9, who was a dog from Doctor Who, the Tom Baker years, and then in a TV series called K9 and Company. That's Allrak from a series called Blake 7, and that's C-3PO from obviously the Star Wars films. And that's Professor Yaffle from a TV series called Bagpuss. Now, the reason I put this was just something that I've never understood. For some reason, if you're my age or you know these references, you'll know about this. Intelligence has always been given the voice of what you would call a kind of camp academic, right? Do you know what I mean? So C-3PO always talks like that, which is not that dissimilar to Richard Dawkins, right? So you have this kind of voice. And I found it Allrak was the same as well. This kind of catty, rather annoyed with humanity voice of superiority. So this is just my one message. Have a broader option of voices for whoever you actually get to voice your AI. That's all I wanted to tell you, that's all. And the reason I've got Professor Yaffle is he was based on the philosopher Bertrand Russell. So HAL, there we go. HAL's another great example of kind of AI, another great example of what happens when something gets intelligence. Now, this is part, again, of the fascination with what can we gain from an artificial intelligence. What do we get when we have something that is considered to have sentience? Now, one of the things that I think is very interesting when it comes to would ChatGPT or other forms of AI be able to write a novel, like a real novel. Now, if they were really, really able to write a novel which truly connects with us and which that particular program has a true thought process, then what that means is that has become something which has enough of an emotional life to no longer be considered to be a machine that can be switched on and switched off. So the reason I mention this is I was down in a Bristol robotics research lab, and they were looking at creating a program where a robot would stop someone from falling in a hole. Right. So what happens is that so they make this program, and basically every time it looked like this human being was about to fall into a hole, then the robot would manage to move forward and stop the person from falling in the hole. Then they put two people into that scenario walking towards the hole, and what they found was both of them fell in the hole because the robot program was not able to make a decision. The decision required that would stop was like that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and they both die instead. So that to me shows that ultimately what we're seeing there is that what makes true art, what makes true thinking, what makes our human process of imagination and intelligence also requires emotion. And if something has emotion, then something has a level of beingness that is beyond a machine that is switched on and off. A good example there, Marvin the Paranoid Android. is a great example of, for anyone who's read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, this is one of those wonderful things where here is an incredible piece of technology that is the most intelligent thing in the universe, and it hates life and it wishes it could be switched off because it suffers from existential anxiety, right? Again, if we ever reach that point where art means something when it's done by AI, where art means something when it's done by a program, then that will be something that is created by something which truly has experience. If you know, there's an essay called about Thomas Nagel wrote about what is it like to be a bat, that he believed that a bat, there is no kind of batness of a bat. It moves around and it gets its food and it hangs upside down and it has a sleep, but it doesn't have an internal monologue. It doesn't have an internal life. And this again it's an internal life, which to me is the thing that is truly what creativity is. You know, why do we have art? Why did I lean against the microphone so that it fed back? All of those things, irrational decisions there being made. But all of those different things that we do, they come from the fact that we are trying to understand what it is to be alive. And that doesn't happen when you just look at something that came out of a program. That's there's the Voight-Kampff test, which some of you know from Blade Runner. But I'm going to skip past that. Jimmy Carr, right? Now, there's a reason I've got Jimmy Carr there. I don't know if I should tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this, right? I think he only has one dream, definitely. It does link very nicely actually to Blade Runner, but Jimmy Carr is someone I've known since he first started in comedy. And I've never seen anyone put together themselves as a performer in such a kind of algorithmic way. So he learned what voice to have. Steve Merchant, the wonderful writer and actor and all these things, Steve Merchant has a kind of delivery that goes a little bit like that. Oh, that's a good idea. You say that kind of thing. Jimmy, one day I go to the pub and he's just talking like this. Oh, I don't think that's a very good idea. I was like, what's going on? And afterwards I said to Steve Merchant, I said, he just did an impression to you all the way through the evening. That's rude, isn't it? He goes, and Steve went, no, that's how he talks now. I went, my God. And then the same happened with his laugh. His laugh never existed till about 15 years ago. And then his laugh appeared. And then and what he'll always say about his jokes is that his jokes don't really mean anything. His jokes are just some words. And then you will hopefully laugh at them because they're a little bit edgy or a little bit risky, whatever they are. And that to me is the closest that I can think of almost watching machine learning becoming a comedian. Because the moment that you have jokes which you just go, none of them mean anything. And this is, I think, the problem again when we talk about what's happening in social media, in mass media, where people will just say, but this doesn't really mean anything. This doesn't, it's just some words. Now, a joke is never just some words. Some jokes are like, I mean, Milton Jones, who I think is a very different kind of comedian, because what I find with Jimmy Carr is I see a rhythm of words and then a kind of boom, there we go, and a rhythm of words. Whereas with Milton Jones, it's like watching a cartoonist. So one of my favorite Milton Jones ones is, have you ever gone into a mosque and had an unbearable urge to play leapfrog? Now that is got visually, is this incredible image that he's created. And that to me, again, is that that's where you see the human mind in action. That's where you see the way that someone is creating something which I don't think an AI would be able to create. I was going to show you a little bit of The Fly. I don't know if anyone's seen.
Still, I'm an insect who dreamt he was a man and loved it. But now the dream is over.
Now, the reason I chose that, oh, by the way, that's just a soft toy that I found that I think scary. So the reason I chose that is because I think there's a very important part in The Fly, which I've often quoted, which if you've not seen it, Jeff Goldblum, who you saw there now, very much going towards the mutation as The Fly. But Jeff Goldblum is a scientist who's worked out a way of transporting matter. And one day he puts in a piece of steak, transports it from one side of the room to the other side of the room in the transport, and then he feeds it to Gina Davis. He cooks it up, and she starts eating it, and she goes, oh, So you know when you taste something and it seems okay initially, but then you go, there's something wrong with it. It's not right. And he realizes that what has not been placed in the program of moving those atoms from there to there is the flesh, the meatiness of the meat. The structure is all there, but the fleshiness, in the same way that with the poetry or with the paintings or with the jokes, that bit where you go, here is the fleshiness, the meatiness, the meanness of that thing. I was going to mention Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Again, we've run out of time for it because I haven't looked at my notes yet, by the way. We haven't actually started, just so you know. We've got all these to go through as well. Oh no, I didn't do that. That's the first main point. We'll get there in a moment. So, but again, Invasion of the Body Snatchers actually is a very similar thing, and I just I'll do this, Anna, because I know that you like this clip. This is one of the greatest endings to a film ever. There you go. So now, the reason that I chose that, I was hoping it was going to be louder. The reason Invasion of the Body Snatchers is another good example of how we sometimes have to think about what it is to be human and what makes us not human. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, again, the creatures that we see look exactly the same as us, but they have no emotion. They have no desire. They have no real inner life beyond the life to say, I want, that's sorry, yeah, I've moved on too many times. But anyway, so they, that bit is they're the shape, but they have nothing that lies within. I mentioned Trump before, but I think this is one of the things that we're seeing in terms of what I would call a backward curve at the moment, this kind of regression that we're going through. Is if you look at a certain kind of politicians and certain kind of leaders, they haven't gone beyond the toddler stage. Because the toddler stage, if any of you've ever looked after toddlers or have toddlers, whatever, you'll know that a child feels its own pain, but doesn't realize that anything else in the world feels pain. So I remember when my son was about 2 years old, he bit this girl till she bled. Not out of any anger, he just did it. And I remember my thinking, oh my God, he's going to turn into Jeffrey Dahmer. I said, no, he's not. I said, the thing is that, anyway, he's fine at the moment. But he's 16, he hasn't killed anyone. So, that biting was because he didn't experience pain, he didn't realize that little girl was experiencing pain because it wasn't. And then we have that point somewhere between 2 and 3 where we begin to empathize and we begin to realize there is, and that again, like in the political world, I think it's quite frightening to watch that. But, we see so many people who can only see their own pain, who are filled with self-pity, but can't see anyone else's problems because they don't experience them themselves. That, by the way, is just, I love this. This is a bit of writing that was done this about 3 years ago. This was someone who traveled and wanted to write a kind of a road movie with the AI that they had on their trip. And this is the first paragraph that came up. 3 seconds after midnight, Coca-Cola factory, Montgomery. A building in Montgomery to his father's study of this town in the same room where the band was being sent off to the police car. The time was 1 minute past midnight, and he was only one who had to sit on his way back. The time was 1 minute after midnight, and the wind was still standing on the counter, and the little patch of straw was still, and the street was open. I like that, but I don't think it'll get published. I'll skip the Dream Machine. So I was going to, sorry, this is if you're in London at all, go to the Tate Modern and see Zanel Maholi. They are an amazing South African photographer. But as you walk into the room and you see so many faces of the people that Zanel has photographed, that's the first thing you see. Nobody can tell our story better than ourselves. Every time we take a shortcut in terms of saying we can save money if we use this program instead of using Matt or Jennifer or whatever it might be, we are reducing our possibilities. It's like if you ever use Amazon and you look at, and they always say, you'll like this film as well. Isn't that an annoying thing? That bit going, no, I like lots of films. No, you've watched this film. So here are a lot of films that are very, very similar. And I think that's what we start to do. We start to reduce those possibilities. That's just a few of the photos that Zanel has on the wall. And you look at each one and you look into those eyes and you see a story that lies within them. Right, so I'm going to now move on to note number 2, which is the stories, the storiness of the story, the humanity, the side. I wrote, there's a couple of things that I'm going to do. One is, I did this with ChatGPT. I don't know why I ever do notes, because they're on two sides. That's quite a good point. Yeah. Never mind. Anyway, so this is, I've got two poems, one that I wrote and one that ChatGPT wrote. So I thought, let's just see where we're getting. So I wrote, write a sad poem about building a den in the woods with your child, right? And so this is what ChatGPT did. In the quiet wood where shadows creep, I built my den, a place to keep the fleeting dreams that pass me by, as shelters 'neath the autumn sky. The branches bowed, the leaves would fall, whispering secrets to the small hands that shaped a fragile home, a place where I could be alone. The twigs they snapped, the stones would roll, as if the earth itself would pull away the walls I tried to make, and crumble what my heart could take. The den, a symbol of escape, a place to hide, a broken shape, a fleeting home for fleeting hearts, built from the woods, now torn apart. And I think that's not. And I don't know what the difference is. So this is the one that I wrote, and this was actually after experience. So this is when I built a den with my son when he was 9, and then started thinking about, would this be the last den that we ever built? Now, first of all, that's one of the first differences in terms of the creativity. These words exist just because I've instructed them to say, write something about this. So again, has no connection with actual emotion or actual experience, or indeed, even though it has a sense of loss within that poem, there is no sense of loss in all of those things that glittered and flickered and glowed as it was being created. So this was the one that I wrote on the day that I built a den with my son. You don't need a storyteller now. Your bedtime is almost autonomous, but still one snuggly hug for safety from the Sandman. Is today the day? Is this our final den? We dragged the sticks and we rolled the logs and we made jokes about that passing walker with a weird-shaped dog. And you found our furniture, a worn and mossy tire. And I warned you of all the dangers of that leaf-hidden, rusty barbed wire. And then, damp-bottomed, we sat and viewed our architectural feat. I phone-filmed your pride for the archives of things we've done, the woodland adventures of father and son. Some days, walking hand in hand, I secretly mourn for the days that are not yet gone, those days that seem like a shepherd's sketch for an A.A. Milne, where every beach is a post-war postcard. The blue, too blue, in my recall. Your freedom is necessity, but not yet. Not yet. Just wait a little bit. Let's pond dip for skaters with a net. Let's build a sofa train, a kick around, a Lego piece found by my bare foot. Let's read Peanuts at Dusk and Calvin and Hobbes. Let's dig and splash and play and mime laser deaths in outer space. Let's race. And then I'll kick the twigs alone. But not yet. Not yet. One more day? So I don't know what the big difference is in those, except I think, and it might merely be my arrogance, that there is something in those words that ChatGPT is currently able to do. There is a rhythm to it, and there is what I would call the kind of received emotion of experience, but without any experience. So it's learned from having lots of poems put into it, and now it's at this kind of almost early, almost Edgar Allan Poe kind of thing without the darkness. But I think that when I read other people's poems, and sometimes they don't have the same rhyme scheme, sometimes they play all manner of different tricks within that. And I think that's a very important part of it as well, because that's like when I was saying the error, human error is so important. The error of art, the Samuel Beckett comment, fail again, fail better. And that's what we are meant to be doing as human beings. Every time that we consider, can the machine do it? It's a lovely idea to think of Richard Brautigan's, All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. But in some ways, there's a certain side of me that almost feels that if AI truly was an artificial intelligence unmanipulated by human beings, it would probably do a better job of running the earth than we would. And it would probably get rid of us straight away because it would see that we were the problem of it. But I think that is, I've done that leaning on the thing again, haven't I? So I'm just going to end by doing a little poem about empathy, because again, I think that's what the moment that you know something is not real. It's like when I watch a movie and I know that too many voices have been in to remove all the idiosyncrasies, to make sure that it's as palatable, because I think that's what you end up with this kind of, every movie, every artwork, everything becomes a committee saying, this, I think, is what the most number of people will enjoy at any one time. And we lose the individualism of our experience every time we decide to use a program that just feeds all of the information in. So this is just about, I call this weapons of empathy. And this is about stories. And this is about, again, why do stories exist? Why does art exist? Why do we wish to replace it with something that has, for at least the time being, no feelings or no sensation? And if we truly are learning from that, then I think we've gone into a very kind of odd place. So I warn you, I've got weapons. I stack them by my bed and I keep them on my shelf. And when I pull back the covers, I'm arming myself. I'm arming myself with other selves. Bullets benignly made of sentences. I put a hole in my skull and pour in other minds. I need to be populated drop by drop. Words will infect me. They'll infect me with empathy. I'll see through eyes that baffled and were baffling, that suffered and made suffering, that were overwhelmed and overwhelming. Voices of poverty, voices in wealth, voices from the underground, voices from out in space. Their light will extinguish the shadows of my presumptions. I'll melt down those certainties into malleable doubts. I'll disturb the status quo that shaped me. I'll increase my possibilities. And when I'm brimful of stories, I'll always have room for one more. And when I'm alone, I'll have the company of ghosts. I lick my finger and I turn a page. Write for me, write yourself. I want your voice on my shelf. Create for me, create, please. Be my weapon of empathy. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you or what this was meant to be about, but that's what I've said. And that's what my erratic human brain created for this particular occasion.